Good morning. Welcome to the 2019 Alan M. Boyden Memorial Lectureship. My name is Nick Hochler. I'm Regional Director and Endowed Chair at the Center for Healthcare Ethics here at Providence. A few announcements before we get started. If you haven't done so already, please silence your cell phones or pagers. Medical grand rounds will go until 9 o'clock, including some time at the end for Q&A. We will then pause to allow time for those who need to go about their day to transition to that. We have set aside time after that for about a 30-minute Q&A session for those who can stay. This presentation is being recorded. For those of you who don't know Dr. Boyden, he was a well-respected and world-renowned leader in local and national arenas who was a surgeon at Providence St. Vincent Medical Center for over 48 years. One of his greatest attributes as a physician and a surgeon was his ability to find wholeness in the physician-patient relationship. This lectureship promotes excellence in patient care by connecting medicine with the medical humanities. It is made possible by the generous contributions to this Providence St. Vincent Medical Foundation. More information on this lectureship and the other programs at the center can be found on our website. Our speaker this morning is Alexa Miller, who is founder and consultant at Arts Practica, a medical education consultancy dedicated to the human practices that improve healthcare quality. A leading voice for observation and inquiry practices in medicine and for their cultivation of arts experiences. Alexa is an original co-creator of the Harvard Medical School Training the Eye, Improving the Art of Physical Diagnosis, a course that produced researched outcomes on the impact of arts experiences on medical student learning. Driven by a strong personal interest and misdiagnosis in medical learning, she serves as a fellow with the Society to Improve Diagnosis in Medicine. She received her baccalaureate from Swarthmore College in art history with extensive studies in education and African studies, and her master's from the Wimbledon School of Art, where her artwork focused on human resilience and medical imagery. She is extensively trained in visual thinking strategies for facilitation and coaching, and has received awards from the Creative Center for People with Cancer and the New England Museum Association. Please join me in welcoming Alexa Miller.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nick. Thank you to the center. It has been such a pleasure to join forces on your endeavors to support reflection and learning here at Providence. So I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you. And I'm very grateful to all of you for your daily work performing and delivering care to human life. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I first want to, whoops, what, oh, I went the wrong. Sorry. Is my presentation here? Thank you. Great. Okay. So my talk today is called Looking with Uncertainty, Inquiries into Visual Art and Practices for Good Medicine. And I have been extremely fortunate in my career over the last 15 years to collaborate with some really great diagnosticians and medical teachers. And I've also just been extremely interested in how really great care is delivered and what that looks like, what that takes, and what seeing has to do with it, and how we can learn to see the world and observe in arts experiences. And through this time, I've just kind of been following this hunch that really great clinicians respond to uncertainty profoundly differently than is the workplace norm in healthcare. And rather than react to uncertainty like it's something to be avoided or an enemy situation, they have this knack for leveraging it into creating a space, a potential space where something can happen. Things like learning and collaboration and discovery and connection. So through the various projects I've had the privilege to work on, and also through my own interactions in healthcare as a patient and as a parent and a patient family member and friend, I've just kind of been keeping an eye on this and really trying to track like how they do that. And I've also been a voracious reader of the literature on clinical reasoning and diagnostic safety, because I believe in there is some extremely important wisdom about how we see and how we know, and how we are able to manage what we know to be fully present with what we see. And that's something that great diagnosticians do extremely well, and something that artists also do extremely well. And so the Looking with Uncertainty framework is my attempt to kind of make this tacit, mysterious knowledge really accessible and to actually teach it in arts experiences. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. First, I, of course, need to disclose my interest. I am the owner of a medical education company that is based on the hypothesis that arts experiences can have a benefit to improving healthcare quality. And that's the only conflict of interest I have to disclose today, but I really am looking forward to the day that I have lots more very cool companies recognizing the importance of language and attention and their role in helping caregivers be fully human and deliver the best care possible, which is what, at the end of the day, this is really about. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look closely at what uncertainty actually is and start to identify some of its key challenges in the clinic. Probably one of my North Star intentions with this work is to help catalyze and cultivate conversations about uncertainty within spaces in which caregivers are working and learning. So simply making it a topic of conversation. I have found over my time teaching observation with medical students as well as medical faculty that even though we've been there in the art museum to talk about what it means to see and look, what they actually really want to talk about is uncertainty, and there's a need for a space to do that. So that's part of what we're doing today. Second, to identify some of the evidence-based approaches that are out there for managing and communicating about uncertainty. And then lastly, to consider the unique qualities of arts experiences as a space for addressing uncertainty. I want to recognize that there are very, very deep roots between art and medicine and the humanities in medicine. And medicine is itself an art. You know, when my assumption about you all, this group, is that within this room there are artists, or many of you probably have a life in the arts or have experience in the arts, and also hopefully see your practice with patients as your art. It's my belief that the art is in the verbs of life. It's the things that we do from a place of being present with ourselves and with other people. And so there's a lot of really interesting, innovative work going on in the space between the arts and humanities and medical learning, or learning in the healthcare professions broadly. And so I kind of think of it as this beautiful spider web in the corner of a room. And what I'm talking about with regards to looking with uncertainty is really just one strand of that web. But there is so much. At the end of the day, art is really about being alive and being fully human and endeavoring as a human towards life and creativity. I just want to recognize that there's so much potential for goodness and innovation beyond what I'm talking about today. But what I'm really striving to do is demystify and crack one piece, one thing that I think is a very central challenge in medicine of navigating uncertainty through arts experiences. So this has been my question. What are the elements of the masterful clinical response to uncertainty. And my frame of researching this question is very much related to my own bias as a visual artist with interest in human resilience as well as medical learning, and as well as my experience as an educator. So I come from a very long line of really great teachers and writers and actors. It's sort of in my blood to be like performative. I was raised that way. And I had an experience, I'm very grateful, very early on in my career. I was trained in this facilitation methodology called visual thinking strategies, which is a teaching protocol that actually comes, it's an arts-based teaching protocol, but it actually comes out of cognitive science. It's unique in the art education space in that it's very much informed by the learning sciences on how people learn and develop. And it was when I was trained in this method, which involved about 3 years of facilitation practice as well as coaching and feedback on how my teaching was actually impacting learners and other people, that was deeply transformative to me and helped me understand the difference between being a really great didactic performer, which hopefully I'm being right now, and really learning to listen and supporting a group in constructing their own knowledge, and sort of handing the authority over of the teacher as transmitter of knowledge to a whole group as co-creators of meaning and knowledge and discovery. And that was deeply transformative to me. And as I've gone on in healthcare and worked on problems around medical learning, I've learned that there's of course a much broader sphere of models coming out of the learning sciences, which I believe there's something about being a really great teacher that intersects with, is a sort of untaught part of clinical practice. So I'm trying to speak to that space as well as what art and creativity have to do with it in terms of this masterful clinical practice in response to uncertainty. So I mentioned before that I didn't kind of come into this space particularly concerned with uncertainty. I came into it through this program at Harvard Medical School, where our learning objective was to help medical learners learn to make careful, unbiased observation a habit. So it's very much about the value of observation in the clinical exam and clinical interactions and its role in thought processes. So that was work that is deeply fascinating, is still deeply fascinating and important. But this interesting thing kept happening where we were talking with students about what they saw, and they really, really, really wanted to talk about the uncertainty and what we do when we don't know. And the more I started to learn about this issue of uncertainty in medicine, the more I've come to see it as really the central challenge that clinicians face in their daily work. Because it is in moments of uncertainty when healthcare can either be delivered at its very best or its very worst. It's in these small moments of uncertainty where patients can either be seen or leave feeling unseen or inadequately seen. And it's in moments of uncertainty where great diagnoses and trust and safety can either be created or destroyed. And uncertainty, as I mentioned before, is something that's probably not adequately talked about to the extent that it's actually present, and to the extent that people actually want to talk about it, caregivers and patients alike. It can be stressful and anxiety producing, and it can be a real risk. So based on the research of many, but including Dr. Paul Hahn, who's at Maine Medical Center, and Dr. Hardeep Singh, who's at Baylor College of Medicine, we can define uncertainty as the subjective perception of ignorance. So what does that really mean? You know, it's a mental state, a state of knowing that you don't know, but it's a very subjective state. And it's based on perception. It's not necessarily based on reality. It's based on perception of reality. Right there for me, subjective perception, I mean, that is what experiencing art is. And we can sort of find our peace as well as some familiarity and learning opportunities in art with that connection alone. And that's what we're going to explore a little later on in the talk. But just to kind of get into some of the basic definitions. So it's knowing that we don't know. It's far more prevalent in the daily moments of clinical life and work and experiences than we tend to recognize. There are a number of different types of uncertainty that come from different sources and sort of live in different places, and that also occur at different stages throughout the clinical encounter, as well as through diseases as they run their course and patients, you know, have their experience and live their lives. It's risky business to acknowledge, especially just structurally and as a result of that culturally within medicine around the way in which error is often like not disclosed or talked about. And of course, you know, patients come to see their care providers because they want certainty. They want to know what is at the root of their suffering and their pain. And of course, clinicians want to provide that. So that is, you know, of course, it's not a happy space to be uncertain on either party. At the same time, sometimes this interesting collusion can happen to arrive at something, and that is often the root cause of bad outcomes. So one of the things that I have noticed from reviewing the patient safety literature is that false certainty is way less safe than carefully acknowledged uncertainty. So it's that little spot where I believe if we could gain some capacity and some ways of some norms and ways of interacting with each other, that we could actually make a huge difference in the way in which we care for one another in society. Lastly, and this is not on your handout because I added this line while I was on the plane coming over here, in part because it's the Ethics Center bringing me here, but I believe it's really true. It is ethically necessary to experience uncertainty when it's there and it's appropriate, and to disclose it to patients. The research of Dr. Gordon Schiff, who leads the Patient Safety Center at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, he does a lot of really interesting research around diagnostic error and communication in the clinic. One of the things he found from reviewing a lot of cases is that uncertainty is often not disclosed by physicians out of fear of lawsuit. But what his research actually found is the opposite, is that when it is disclosed, even in cases of error, that actually brings down lawsuit. Another study that speaks to this very well, I think, was a patient focus group recently run by the Society for the Improvement of Diagnosis in Medicine. And they have a big patient engagement sector of their work. And they worked with a number of patient advocacy groups to do a broad-scale focus group with patients. And they found that the number one thing that patients wanted was to talk with their physician about uncertainty. So there's this belief that, you know, people don't want to talk about it, but if you scratch the surface of that, it's a very sort of pregnant and alive thing that warrants being talked about, and people really do want to talk about, but it needs to happen very carefully because, again, that's a place where trust can either be made or broken. So before I go on much longer about uncertainty, what I wanted to do is actually just facilitate an experience right here in this room, an authentic experience of uncertainty in an arts discussion. So you do not need, so in order to like have the experience, I'm not going to tell you any background information about this work of art, so we can have a positive experience of not knowing. That said, if you think you know some background information about this, or you might know about it, that is absolutely welcome in this discussion, and I encourage you to bring that in as well as your questions. So what we're going to do is just look at this work of art together and talk about what we see. This is what I'm going to do is the visual thinking strategies teaching technique, but we're not going to like talk about pedagogy very much. What I want you to do is just have the experience in a space of not knowing, and that's what we're going to talk about. So we'll start with just a moment of quiet to take in this work of art. Okay, so what is happening here? Rest. And what do you see that makes you say rest?
The head on top almost looks like he's leaning down and kind of taking a break.
Okay, great. So I hear you sort of noticing the gesture and the positioning of this head right here, as if this figure is leaning down and taking a break. Okay? What more can we find? Yes? Okay. And can we have the lights down a little bit just for resolution? Thank you. So I hear you looking at the shapes and the contours and noticing a lot of curves. What do you see that makes you say that?
The art itself is in a square, the frame is square, and there's shapes up against the edges that sort of fill the space with curves. There's buttock, shoulders, knees, elbows, ankles, heels, all curved.
Okay, great. So we have this square-like overall composition or surface in which, and sort of, I think I hear you pointing out how so we have a lot of these curvy shapes of body parts, and they're sort of interacting with the edges as well in some places. Okay? What more can we find?
Connection.
Yes. Oh, let's see. Who said connection? And what do you see that makes you say that connection?
Just the intertwined nature of what you see in form and in shape.
Okay, great. So noticing a lot of intertwinement between the two figures. And you said in form and in shape. What do you see that makes you say that?
Form as in they look like structural bodies, but also in shape, it kind of going off the curved pieces, and then you have the square mirroring of what look like hands or feet or whatnot. There's continuation and repetition of the form of the humans and the shapes in which they hold.
Okay, great. So looking at the sort of overall forms of these bodies, and seeing some repetition. I think I hear you saying maybe like some mirroring or some similarity between the overall forms of these two bodies, as well as the shapes by which the bodies are made up, and noticing the sort of block-like or square-like shapes making up the digits of the hands and the feet, and the squares of the edges of the surface, as well as the rounded forms. And I think you were giving that as evidence, sort of emphasizing this idea of connection. Okay, what more can we find? I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, actually, to me, this looks like struggle, but the balance of it is sort of fascinating to me. That I sort of look at this as wrestlers, or it looks contentious to me. But it has this very beautiful, like I say, balance and symmetry, which is kind of fascinating.
Okay, great. So I hear you not disagreeing with this idea of balance and symmetry, but also seeing at the same time something that might be contradictory to that, sort of an idea of struggle. And what do you see that, and like almost as if they're wrestlers or something like that. What do you see that makes you say that?
Well, as I tried to sort out the limbs, especially on the right side, I realized, oh my gosh, it's like I don't know. It just looks so forceful the way the lower figure's arm is forced up through and kind of around the bent and externally rotated. It has to be, I guess, leg of the other person. I was trying to sort of sort it out anatomically.
Yeah.
And it just felt not peaceful to me.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Okay, great. So looking at the not peaceful or perhaps not naturalistic positioning of this leg, I hear you pointing out that it is, it's not only, it's sort of torqued and disjointed and suggesting a lot of force with and potentially struggle within this composition that at the same time can also feel sort of restful. So kind of wondering about that. Okay, what more can we find? Yes, back there?
It creates in my mind a little bit of imbalance in that I noticed 3 of the 4 feet have 4 toes,
Yes.
the other has 5.
So 1, 2, 3. Okay, great. So looking closely at the actual digits here and noticing that 3 of the feet have 4 toes, whereas one of them has 5. So kind of wondering about that, kind of feeling a little, I think you said the word imbalance there, wondering about that. Okay. What more can we find? Yes.
So looking at this as a kind of from a medical perspective, where the person is not able to tell us how they're feeling. Facially, I would say there's not a lot of distress, in the face. There's not tension in the eyebrow or the jaw, so to speak, and there doesn't appear to be tension in the body. So I'm just kind of thinking, well, maybe there's kind of an overall calm or lack of tension in the overall piece because of that.
Okay, great. So I hear you looking for signs of tension and not really seeing signs of tension. And what do you see that makes you say that?
What do I see that gives me reason to question tension?
That makes you say, yeah, I'm looking for tension and I'm not. So what do you see that makes you say there's a lack of tension?
Yeah. I guess it's the face that kind of drew me in to just kind of be curious about
This face? Or this one?
both faces. To just be curious about the overall sense of, are they in pain?
Uh-huh.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So it's something that we as clinicians
Yeah.
are curious about.
Yeah. Okay. So looking closely at the facial expression, noticing like there does not appear to be signs of tension in the face or
I guess I would call it distress.
distress. Okay. Okay. So not really seeing within the body or within the face like signs of tension or distress. Okay. What more can we find? Yes.
I think when I look at this, I worry about a sense of loss. Like,
Okay.
to me, it kind of looks like 2 individuals who are struggling to console each other, but I don't get a sense of joy from this picture
Uh-huh.
either, so I worry that something bad has happened and kind of that awkward embrace that happens when 2 people are trying to console each other.
Okay, great. So kind of coming back to this theme of like, what are they doing, or is this a moment in a narrative? Is this rest? Is this struggle? I hear you suggesting the potential for them to be consoling each other, and perhaps they have gone through some kind of loss together. And what do you see that makes you say that?
I think especially the lower figure doesn't look pleased to be in that embrace. I don't know how to say it
Mm-hmm.
otherwise.
Oh.
There's a sadness to that face to me.
Okay. Okay, so returning to this face and seeing potentially a sadness here associated with the embrace. Okay? What more can we find? Yes.
So I see humor, this visual pun. You know, we already talked about the foot that's not a foot, it's a hand because it's got 5 fingers like the other hand. The bent over round buttocked figure 1, right, looks like he's got 2 hands, both of which are hanging down. But then that's in a normal, if we just erase the other guy, if you put your hands around the other guy and you just look, that feels like a normal human posture, this.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you go sort out the limbs, like you were sorting out limbs, right? You figure out that's the other guy's foot. That's a joke. Like, that feels like a joke to me. And I guess it's the fact that the digits are all, there's no prehensile thumbs, so these people are sort of powerless. But they're also like sort of animal-like, polar bear-like, you know, they're paw-like digits, human-like faces, but paw-like fingers, hands. It feels funny, and yet there's nothing particularly funny in the rest of the piece.
Okay, so I hear you sort of pointing out a humor that's like a curious humor or a peculiar kind of humor,
like
but
luxury humor, like oh, I made you see funny.
yeah. Okay, so and I sort of hear you circling around like that the artist, is making this to convey some kind of message or response, and that like thinking there's perhaps some kind of wit or visual pun going on here, especially with regards to the way in which we might initially sort of look for hands here and then realize that this is a foot and that sort of takes a little minute to get, and then it's it's potentially like jokes on you, and also coming back to these square-like digits and pointing out that the lack of thumb could imply a real powerlessness and perhaps an association with like not humanness, but perhaps more like animal-like in association. Okay. What more can we find? A couple more comments. Yes.
In the nakedness, there's an openness, and yet there's boundaries. There's distance between the two.
Okay, so there's in the nakedness there is openness. Let's start with that. What do you see that makes you say that? Openness in the nakedness.
Just in the nature of being naked is an openness.
Oh, okay. So, all right, I wasn't sure. Okay, so the fact that they appear to be naked suggests a real openness or perhaps like a familiarity between the two. Is that what you're getting at? Okay, and then as well as the space.
There's
Boundaries. And what do you see that makes you say that?
Just the physical space
between them.
The two bodies. And yet there is engagement, obviously, and some touching, but yet there's boundary.
Okay, so we have lots of points of contact and intertwinement as we've talked about, but you're noticing we also have distance and space between them. Okay, what more can we find? Yes.
It seems a little disconcerting. On one hand, folks were pointing out the initial impression that I had too is some restfulness, but the more I look and see, there's balance, but with the potential of imbalance. If the two figures didn't stopped embracing, they would fall over if they were standing. And so there's balance, and then there's kind of the potential for falling apart. And I'm interested, no one's pointed this out, but the artist was particularly interested in showing at least one of the figures' gender through the genitalia on that person or that figure, but leaves us a little bit uncertain about the other. I'm not sure what that's about.
Okay, great. So pointing out kind of like this initial sense of like there's some kind of trouble. There's some kind of like imbalance while at the same time seeing balance. And kind of coming back to the interdependence of the two in the way in which they're intertwined, kind of wondering if like they would fall over if it weren't for if it weren't for the other. And also really like just noticing that we're privy here to genitalia in one of the figures and not in the other, and wondering about like why the artist might have done that. Okay, what more can we find back there? Yes?
The more I look at this, initially I saw conflict, but I agree with the previous speaker about the balance. It almost looks kind of Taoist as far as the yin and the yang, with the two heads kind of in that kind of balance between the conflict. They're wrestling, but they look like they're almost in a neutral position, and it's kind of like that pushing against each other that brings them together. And you see the two heads, almost like that circle for Taoism, between the yin and the yang.
Okay, great. So really building on this theme about balance and seeing suggestion or like possible similarity or possible referral to the idea of the yin and the yang, sort of noticing the wholeness of their form as one, and the almost like the dots of the two heads and the way in which they're intertwined, and sort of underscoring this theme of balance while at the same time kind of seeing conflict and messiness there. And like connecting to the possibility of Taoist themes around that in the yin and the yang of life. Okay, this has been a really great discussion. I see hands in the air, and I'm sorry to not call on everybody and have to leave some things unresolved. But I think it goes without saying that there's a lot to see here. And if we slow down and pause for a moment and put our heads together, we can actually construct quite a lot. Before I kind of get into my little bit on uncertainty and extrapolate some little pieces that I want to suggest to you, I actually would just love to take a minute or two and hear from you some thoughts that you might have about how this experience of looking together at this work of art could potentially relate to learning in the health professions or issues in the health professions. Yes?
When you look at it by yourself, you say, oh, it's rest or conflict or whatever. You think you kind of know and you're ready to move on. But when you hear another person's perception, and in like a very open way, you are suddenly going, oh wait, there is rest and there's conflict. You just have a more nuanced view of what is happening that your own, like if you were only relying on yourself, even if you stayed and looked at it for a long time.
Okay,
By
great.
yourself, you're kind of trapped in your own perceptions, biases, whatever. But when you really
Yeah.
listen to other people, you are open to more, to broader interpretations.
That is a great thought. And I'm going to do this thing where I repeat and mirror back what you guys say, in part because I want to make sure everybody hears it, and also because we're recording this session and the overhead mics are broken. So I want to capture everybody's comments. But what I hear you saying is that when you look at something by yourself, you have your own sort of read, and then looking at it within the context of others. You hear what others are bringing to it. And what I hear in that comment is that when you do look at something by yourself, you might not have the awareness at any given moment of just how particularly sort of trapped in your own biases and experience and read you are. And I think what I hear you saying in that is that it's quite expansive and humbling to hear so many other reads that differ perhaps so widely from one another and from your own, that it not only expands your mind, but it also clues you into just how subjective and unique to you your perception is at any given moment. And we might all be sitting here thinking we're looking at the same thing, thinking basically the same thing, but one of the things that this process can do is show us that we're not even all looking at the same thing. Like some of us are looking over here and some of us are looking over here. And we're all thinking or associating different things. So we're having vastly different experiences, which shapes sort of the knowledge that we put forth at any given moment. And we sort of all like know that in theory, but it's quite humbling to experience it in real time. Okay, great. Other thoughts about how this might relate to clinical practice or clinical learning? Yes?
You don't have to have a solid foundation, implying knowing everything in order to still have connection and relationship with your patient, doctor.
Okay, great. So you don't have to know everything about this in order to actually really know a lot about it. Like I think, I know some about this work of art. Was made in 1914 out of plaster by the artist Henri Gaudier-Bretzka. It is called The Wrestlers, but and there's a lot we can know about the artist and the artist's interests in that period of time and the place that he was making work. But do we ever really fully know like what a work of art is about? No, of course not. Then its meanings are constantly slightly beyond us. That's what makes it great art, right? That's why we continue to look at it and want to learn. And I hear you saying like this level of presence that one brings to a patient, whether or not they know the full case history or not, and the ability to discern and discern knowledge and work with what's going on and what needs to happen. Those abilities of being in the present that are sort of the essential piece of great clinical work and are very similar to what we're able to build and find here without really knowing a lot about this piece. And I will add to that comment that imagine you had known in advance that this is called The Wrestlers. If I had said, hey, we're going to look at this work of art, it's called The Wrestlers. What would we have seen? Rest? Would we have seen sexuality? Would we have seen peacefulness as well as conflict? Would we have seen the potential for Taoist principles? Maybe, but it would have been a lot harder had we gone in with that frame, because we would have had to do that artist work of forgetting what we know in order to be present with what we've seen. And now, does the fact that it's called The Wrestlers, does that mean they are two wrestlers wrestling? Absolutely not. It has to do with wrestlingishness as it interacts with our life and relationships. But for me, one of the reasons I love this piece is because it's titled The Wrestlers, and it's because we can see so much beyond wrestling and also expand our idea of wrestling, what that means in our world, if we go in without knowing that information. So great. So really sort of speaking to how we manage what we know in the present with what we see. Yes, back there.
I think part of like that's missed, we might be the experts in medicine, but the patients are the experts in their lived experience in their bodies. And so while we're trying to figure out our perceptions with each other, we get so much value from asking the patient what
Yeah.
their understanding of their own experience is, and
Uh-huh.
having the patient be your co-contributor to helping figure
Right.
out the uncertainty versus that power differential dynamic that we miss
Right.
a lot when we don't ask them. It loses us, validating and valuing what they understand about their condition and how they feel and how it,
Great.
accommodates them.
Great. So I hear you really like putting your finger on the challenge of the clinical interaction and how we figure out what's going on and whose job that is, and the sort of power dynamics around that, and the shift from the doctor is the authority on what's going on here to being in relation with a patient as they convey the complexity and the uniqueness of their experience in their body, in their health, and also in their life. And the work of co-creating that, and the complexity of that, as well as the sort of shift from what our culture and much of our schooling sort of leads us to understand is where the authority is held. So I hear you speaking to that as well. Okay, maybe one last comment. Yes.
Well, I enjoyed the experience, but I would offer a word of caution, I guess, because when I looked at this initially, I thought eroticism, then struggle, and then when the yin and the yang, the Taoist issue came up, I said, my gosh, that's it. The man-woman struggle, the eyes. So I came to that conclusion after the experience.
Mm.
based on the experience.
Okay, great. So I hear you, like you're putting a finger on sort of the value of what we constructed based on us, and wondering about the actual accuracy of that. Was this artist intending, you know, the things that we brought into it and brought up, which is a great question, and I want to, let's see, and I think my takeaway from that is always like to be extremely deliberate about like knowing what our questions are and then checking them out. With art, I think there's a big difference sort of in that issue that you're raising. There's a big difference about what we do with that in, say, arts education versus medical education. And I have a lot to say about that in terms of arts education, but I think I'll save that for the Q&A just to keep going down the road in medical education. But is there a connection with regards to issues and learning in healthcare professional education that relates to for you?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Because you come up with the diagnosis
Right.
based on the logical progression of
Yep.
data, and then if you come
Yep.
up with the wrong diagnosis, then you've actually done a disservice
Yep.
to the patient.
Okay.
Because then you're treating the wrong diagnosis. So
Okay.
that's the caution that I would.
Absolutely. Okay, and so I think actually what I hear in your comment is that you almost like arrived at a diagnosis or a resolution that felt really right to you, and that you that then you wondered, like, is that the right diagnosis? And what do we do like when we feel this idea of like we're satisfied, the satisfaction of our search? And I think that's a very productive place to work within this work, because many errors in diagnosis come from that sense of a search being satisfied. In fact, like the most commonly missed error in emergency medicine, does anybody know what it is? Sorry, the most commonly missed fracture. The most commonly missed fracture in emergency medicine is the second fracture. And that's search satisficing error. So like a very human, natural, normal, we are neurologically wired to be this way, tendency to call off our searches once we find something that feels satisfying. And then we miss, the failure to continue to keep looking. So I think one of the things that I find very beautiful about this process is the implicitness of that there is always more to see and continue to wonder about even after we have found those findings. And you think about what the word curiosity actually means. It means it's like this assumption that there's always more to know. What more can we find? There's always more to see here. It never stops. So your question is a very good one and very well taken, and I think that there's an opportunity in medical learning to help our learners, understand that. Okay, so with regards to, oh my goodness, what have I done with my, thanks. Errors of search, speaking of. So there are, as I mentioned, I've been doing this work, creating this framework called Looking with Uncertainty that breaks down how do these masterful clinicians respond to uncertainty. What are some of the key moves that they make in practice? So I have a list of them. I want to share a few with you, a few right now from that you all just did. So the first is just take a pause. Creating some space, literally as artists create space between forms to activate those forms, the negative space, taking a space to pause and take in what you see, creating that pause for thinking as well as for tending to emotions and letting it hit you, letting it work on you, processing. The second being seeing for yourself. Your comment really spoke to that. Having independent thought while also considering other perspectives, but really looking at something with a frame of like, what is going on here? As opposed to, okay, I'm looking for signs of this and milestones of that and deficiencies of this, and I'm just going to look for what I need to find. It's a very different kind of looking. And then the third being disciplined language. So I was constantly asking you, what do you see that makes you say that? Which is a forcing strategy for sharing your reasoning and using careful language to break fact from inference. So with regards to the first, taking a pause, there's actually quite a bit in the literature around diagnostic reasoning on the importance of just taking a pause for thinking at the right moments. I want to, of course, recognize that, it is endemic right now, the limitations around time that everybody is facing in their clinical work. So, I hate telling busy people to slow down and take a pause. It actually pains me very much. But part of why I do it is to make a space to talk about the importance of doing it, and also knowing sort of when recognizing the right time, which often has to do with when we're feeling a lot or need the space for some processing. There was a study done recently in an ambulatory setting where the entire unit was prompted to take diagnostic pauses in certain cases where there were red flagged for likelihood of cancer. And they found that in the unit doing that, 13% of the time, the alerts resulted in the clinicians reporting taking different actions. This very recently came out, this opinion piece by Moulton and colleagues, reviewing the literature on attention in neuroscience as well as clinical judgment, and making a case that knowing when to slow down is in itself a marker of clinical expertise. This is exactly the bread and butter of what we do as human beings in arts experiences. We take that pause and we go, that is the place from which art is made and experienced. So this is one place where we would not have actually seen so much potential for life and meaning in that picture had we not taken the pause to just take it in. Looking really takes a lot of time. This is the visual thinking strategies method, and silent looking is a really essential piece of the method. I will tell you, it always, even after many years of teaching in this way and advocating for silences and pauses as a group allows meaning and knowledge to emerge, it always feels awkward, even still, because it's counternormative to how we tend to work. There's more literature coming out of the education field about the necessity of silence in the classroom, and we often our schooling messages us that what's valuable or productive or smart is not silence, but more and more we can see nuanced forms of it as a form of participation itself. Okay. The second being seeing for yourself. So I've looked at this work of art many times with many different groups. It's always a profoundly different discussion, but often these larger themes or these paradoxes come out unique to this work of art. So one of the things I love about it is that it really is full of paradoxes, just like some of the best and most challenging things in life. So when we look at this work, we can see enemies, people at battle. We can potentially see lovers at rest. We can see the potential for a sexual encounter as well as totally potentially asexual situation. We can look at it as heteronormative or as same-sex or as multi-sex in some kind of ways. It has a feeling of like an ancient, timeless relic. I've heard groups talk about it, are these people from Pompeii who are preserved in ash, or are these like ancient wrestlers, and at the same time it has a forward-looking sort of modernist abstraction to it. And it's, let's see, it's this process of really looking for ourselves with a questioning frame of mind that in the literature on visual thinking strategies is referred to, and this relates to your comment, as reasoning in a social context. So when an individual looks for themselves, they make observations. They're in their own cognitive cycle, make observations, begin to make inferences based on those observations, start to articulate an argument stating a hypothesis. Then, as soon as that argument is put into words and put sort of out into the ether, it enters a social cycle. It becomes interactive and therefore complex. So ideas are communicated, other people are listening. This brings in a critical evaluation. Wow, I really don't agree that they're wrestlers. I still see them at rest. Or, oh, I kind of see that. I'm going to change my mind. It's in the collision with other ideas that we really think for ourselves, get into some debate about it, then it goes back into the cognitive cycle. So we reframe our original assumptions and hypotheses, and we look again, and we use the new information to expand our thinking. So the process of seeing for ourselves and thinking independently happens at its best when in conjunction with other voices. Now, I know that I'm probably preaching to the choir here about a lot of this stuff, but the need to solicit other perspectives and the need to recognize when it's time to get help or recognize when one's own perspective might be limited. That's one of the top patient concerns of basically all the patient safety leaders. But it's really hard. We're all sort of course, for listening to each other and collaborating. But it's hard in practice to know when you have bumped up against that limit. And I believe it's only, it's through this kind of practice in an ongoing way that we can know those limits better and seek that communication with more ease. I will mention this study that I was involved in at Harvard when we oh my goodness, are we over time? We are over time. Okay. All right. I am so sorry. All right. I want to respect everybody's time. So if people need to leave, that's fine. I apologize. I think we went on a little too long in the art discussion. I want to, I guess what I will do is thank you all for, I want to just leave you here with, I see uncertainty as these moments of choice where we can either move towards fear or we can move towards learning. And in a clinical context, what fear often entails is avoidance, failure to disclose. Uncertainty can result in labeling things like premature closure, the defensive practices around over-testing, or just downright apathy. Whereas a learning mindset entails staying calm and curious, disclosing uncertainty and having the courage to talk about it and doing so in a nuanced, careful way. Co-creating health with the patient, sort of that shift from, transmitting, holding all the knowledge to being in relation to a patient. And then, most importantly, having that relationship, that commitment. I don't know, but I'm going to be with you, or we're going to figure this out. Finding committing to the ongoing learning. So I want to thank you all so much for your work and for your curiosity about this topic, and I'm happy to stick around and answer questions. Thank you.